Welcome to this July 2023 case study class. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters, a multiple ICAEW prize winner. When I sat the case study exam myself, I won the ICAEW prize for the highest score in the world with 92%. Several of my students have also won ICAEW prizes for their performance in the case study exam. During this class, I'll be teaching you the exam technique to use for requirement 1 so that you can score a similar mark in the case study exam. In order to do this, I'll be working through our mock exam 1 for KUAS. I'll be working through the exam, explaining exactly how you should approach each section of your report and the type of points to include. I'll be referencing my model answer, which demonstrates how to structure your report and the type of points to include for each section. I will also be referring to the marking key so that I can demonstrate how my technique will ensure that you hit most of the points on the marking key. I'll also be using our AI analysis document, which nicely summarizes all of the key points from each exhibit, both the narrative points and financial points, including additional financial analysis performed on the numbers. I will also be using our pro forma report, which is what I use when attempting the mock exams. So I'll be using this as guidance to remind me of the types of points to include for each section. A very useful resource in the exam. So this class is taken from my case study video course. Full details for the course can be found on the case study page of the ACA Masters website. So if you just go down to the section for the video course, you can find full details there of the other classes and also some other sample classes. In terms of the AI analysis and pro forma report that I'll be using in the class, you can find full details for these resources under the pro forma report and AI analysis heading. And then, of course, I'll be using our first mock exam, which you can find under the mock exams and model answers section of the website. So we'll start by looking at requirement 1. So we would receive the email from the partner of our firm, and we'll be told that we have just received the latest management accounts. We need to carry out a review of KUAS's performance. We also need to address some business issues facing KUAS. I am attaching the following, and then we can see that we're going to have the management accounts as we'd expect, and there's a request for advice. And we've got a note with the management accounts and the management accounts themselves. So they're the parts which will be relevant for requirement 1. This will of course be for requirement 2, and this will be for requirement 3. You might just want to have a kind of a quick skim, but obviously requirement 2 is about a new tender. And then we've got something in requirement 3 about a strategic alliance, about something being jointly developed. So then we'll look at requirement 1, and we can see the specific requirement wording wants us to review performance for the current year in comparison with the previous year. The review, of course, should be based on the management accounts as set out in the exhibit, and there's the additional information in the other exhibit, and include appropriate recommendations for improving the business. So we'd always have recommendations, as we know, at the end of each requirement. So this is the bit to really focus on. It tells us what it should cover. So revenue, as has always been the case in every case study exam, for each activity individually and in total. So we're looking at the whole business, so we'll do the total numbers and for each activity. Then we've got gross profit again for each activity and in total. And then we've got operating profit in total, because of course we don't have that split out by activity. Based on your analysis, conclude on KUAS's performance. As we always would, we have a conclusion. You should also respond to the request for advice. So, as is the case in the majority of requirement ones, we have the additional piece of analysis or the additional issue to deal with as well. So as we would expect, we'll have the management accounts and then we'll have a note to go with them. So very familiar with these from the AI. So we've got P&L, balance sheet, and then all the notes which go with them. So we've got all of these broken down just as we did in the AI. So relatively straightforward there. And then, of course, we've got the additional information. So probably quite likely that we'll get the business metrics as we're in the AI. And of course, we've got some narrative as well, which will give us some reasons as to why certain amounts have gone up or down. And then we've got the request for advice. So we can probably just ignore that for now, because we'll know we'll do that at a later part. For now, we're going to focus on doing the performance analysis of the business. So you can see we've got a reasonable amount to work through. We've got some numbers and we've obviously got some narrative as well. Of course, we're going to try and use as much of the exam paper information as we can in our answer. So straight away, when I look at the requirement, I always think to myself, what will the marking key look like? I imagine this in my head, and I always think, what's this going to look like if we have to do revenue, gross profit, operating profit, and an additional piece of analysis? Because of course we know that the boxes in the left column, will be the same in every exam. So these are pretty much fixed. Appendix 1. And then again, some calculation of the numbers, and then the context points. And of course, the columns on the right are fixed, because that would be conclusions and recommendations. So it's really these middle 6 which are up for grabs. So if you need to do revenue, gross profit, operating profit, and the request for advice, obviously they all can't have 2 boxes each. So there must be a couple of these which are going to share a box. And it's most common that gross profit and operating profit will share a box. So I'm kind of thinking that's what it would be for revenue, these 2 boxes here. In every exam, revenue's had at least 2 boxes, and there's a lot to analyze here. So we think that's highly likely it will have at least 2 boxes. And then we've got profit. We'll merge those together because the request for advice will almost always have 2 boxes as well. So it's definitely worth just thinking that at the start, when you look at the requirement, try to visualize the marking key, because if you can think about what the boxes are likely to be on, then that gives you a bit of a steer as to how much to write for each section. Of course, we're going to answer everything that we are required to, but that just helps us in terms of the volume to write for each section. So we know that our headings are going to be revenue, cost of sales and gross profit, or you could just call it gross profit, and operating profit. And then we've got the additional piece of analysis, no ethics, and then we'll have conclusions and recommendations as well. But we'll just bear in mind that gross profit and operating profit are probably sharing a box. So there might be, because there's a lot to do for gross profit and operating profit, there's a lot of different lines of costs which we could look at. Perhaps we're not going to do all of them, because that's going to be a little bit overkill if there's only 2 boxes, and we'll probably find that some points are backslashed with one another. So of course we'll focus on the ones which have seen the most significant change in the year, and where we have a reason from the exam paper as to why it's gone up or down. So once I've firstly thought about what the marking key will look like, and therefore what my headings will be, on my report, and I've got a bit of an idea as to how much I'm going to include for each section. I like to work through the numbers, and as I've explained before in previous classes, I personally like to do it kind of one section at a time. So I'll start with revenue and I'll do my revenue numbers, write up my revenue section, and then move on and then do my gross profit section, and then do my operating profit section. So of course, we can then come down and get the numbers for revenue. Obviously, with the AI analysis, all of the prior year numbers are to hand and nicely set up. So by the time you've practiced a few mock exams, you'll probably actually know some of these numbers off by heart. But I would always suggest just checking back and making sure that you get them absolutely correct, because you don't want to drop any easy marks there for just maybe having a transposition error or something like that. So you might decide you want to go through and put your prior year numbers in first of all. Obviously, if you just kind of put in the main numbers, then you could set up formulas for mix, and then of course you can just drag it across for the current year. Obviously, double check all the formulas to make sure when you've dragged it across, it has calculated it correctly. So you might decide to put in all your prior year numbers and calculate the metrics like revenue per installation and mix and things like that, and then drag it across to the current year, 2023. So that should be fairly quick. And then of course you can just go through the exam paper and then just put the numbers in for the current year. And then obviously if you drag things like mix across from the previous year, then that will automatically populate the current year numbers, and revenue per upgrade, revenue per installation can all be dragged across. Tender success rate. So once I've got the numbers, and even sometimes as I go through, I'm always kind of thinking to myself, what's this showing me? I don't just do all the numbers and don't really think about what they represent. Obviously, prior to the exam, there's a lot of anticipation about what will actually be happening, and you've been thinking a lot. Will installations go up? Will monitoring and maintenance go down, for example? So it's quite nice on exam day when you actually see what the performance was for the year. But kind of as I go through, I'll just kind of make a bit of a mental note and be like, oh, installations is up. Yeah, that's quite good. Monitoring and maintenance up even more. So overall, it's been a really good year. Revenue mix has shifted towards M&M. So straight away, I'm thinking I might try and use that in my gross profit analysis, or in fact, I almost certainly will, because we know M&M is higher margin. Obviously, we'll look at the margin for the current year. But as soon as I see that, I'm thinking that would be a reason why gross profit margin overall will have gone up, if it has gone up. Similarly, when I can see that construction revenue has increased more than the others, therefore I'd expect to see when I do my mix calculations that mix is shifted towards construction, because if it's increased by more than the others, that is of course would result in revenue mix shifting towards construction. Again, that's going to be positive for the gross profit margin. You can see with construction, installations have gone up, but interestingly, revenue per installation has actually gone down. And then you can see here with other as well, again, installations up, but revenue per installation down. So it looks kind of great when you look at the volume, but actually revenue per installation has dropped. You can look at that overall as well. Upgrades, again, that's up, but revenue per upgrade has also up as well. So then we can see M&M terminations, they've gone down. So that's good. And then we can see with tenders that the tenders, so if we look at it by volume, we can see that the number that they've won has gone up, the number they've participated has gone up, but overall the tender success rate has gone up, which again makes sense because the increase in the number of tenders won is up by more than the tenders participated in. So you'd expect the tender success rate therefore has gone up. Similarly, you could look at it by value. Similar picture really. Tender success by value has also gone up, for the same reasons, because the number they've won by value is up by more than the amount they've participated in. And then you can look at the average values. But again, a kind of similar story to the revenue per installation. The average value's actually gone down, even though they've won more, and they've actually participated in lower value tenders as well. That's definitely something that we'd want to comment on. I think that's good example of like a further insight point. That isn't just as easy as saying this number went up by X amount for this reason. That's that further analysis of the numbers, that skill that people, I think everybody finds quite difficult because it's a higher level skill, that kind of evaluation of the revenue. So we know kind of what's happened with revenue, and of course we would have picked up some of the metrics from here, like the number of installations, number of upgrades, and amounts, monitoring and maintenance agreements which were terminated in the tender figures. Obviously, we've got these non-financial metrics as well, which we're going to try and use in our answer. But of course, that fits in quite nicely with staff. This has an impact on M&M, and we can kind of think about response times where we might include those. And then, of course, we've got the narrative. So we can have a look at the narrative information that we're given here. We're told that Bowen, who we knew from the AI, started 4 large house building projects in August 22. So, of course, during the year, towards the start of the year, and that was to install security systems and provide monitoring services at each site. So clearly that would result in construction going up. So that could be a reason there that we can use for construction. So you might even decide to start putting on some of your points on your pro forma report as you go. You might want to make a quick note. So, as we've discussed previously, you'd have overall revenue and then by each activity. So INU and M&M, and then maybe a breakdown of I and U. So construction, other, and then upgrades. And then, of course, we could look at tender success and mix perhaps as well. So you might decide to kind of just annotate this, and you might have it as a reason for construction. I mean, you could have it as a reason for INU as well. Obviously, that's a breakdown of that. So technically, you could put it either. So KUNS also won a large tender with another house builder, although the work will now not start until September 23 due to delays with the construction work. So they did win another tender, but there have been some delays there. So again, you could incorporate that. As I've said before, anything in the exam paper, we're trying to think, why is the examiner's given us this? We're trying to use this as much as possible in our answer. So you could include that with the same point in with construction. Concerns over crime increased in 2023 following reports in the media that shop theft was on the rise. So we knew about this from the AI, that perceived crime can result in an increase in installations and just a general increase in security. So as a result, KUAS was engaged to install new CCTV systems at several retailers. So that would be kind of a reason there. So again, you could use it under INU, or you could, of course, use it under other. So again, we've got a reason here as to why that's gone up. The board deemed the Mystify trial to be a success, and installations proceeded at Ringstar's 40 other stores. So that planned expansion went ahead, so it was deemed to be a success. The 40 other stores installations went ahead. It was also installed at 130 locations belonging to other retail and leisure clients. So that, of course, was ahead of the forecast because it was forecast to be 100. KUAS's share of the costs were exactly as forecast. So the costs were the same, but of course revenue was higher. So there would, of course, be higher revenue Obviously, the higher purchase costs associated with that, but obviously more gross profit overall. But then the share of the cost, like the share of the R&D, the share of the marketing, were as forecast. So this is definitely going to be a reason, well, why revenue will be higher, but also why profit will be higher as well. So hopefully in the exam we told some information about how Mystify performed during the period, so we can of course compare it to that forecast. But that would be a good example of like some further analysis. We can get the easy iron you up with the reason from the exam paper. This is probably a little bit more further analysis. We can maybe work with those numbers to see whether it met the forecast. So we could have that there. So of course we could do some calculations on that, towards the bottom of our appendix. So you could have it with the revenue, but you could include that in there as well to see how that ended up. But if we knew like the selling price and we knew the total number of stores, so the 130 other clients plus the 40 for Ringstar, and we know that they get 80% of the revenue, then you could work out what the revenue would be and how that compared to the forecast. So we're told that after conducting detailed analysis on historic tender data, the board took the decision to focus on lower value tenders from January 23 with the aim of increasing the tender success rate. So we're definitely going to want to include some points in our answer about the tender success rate, because we did see that it went up and they took the decision to focus on lower value tenders. So actually we can see that in the numbers, because we can see that one, that revenue per installation is lower, but looking specifically at the tenders, we can see that by value it had gone down, and they aim to increase the tender success rate, which they have done. So it does appear to be a successful policy. They're a successful strategy. So we're definitely going to want to look at tender numbers in our analysis. There'll definitely be marks for this, given so much information was given to us in the exam paper. So we can look at it by volume and by value, and then we've got our reason there, because that's from the strategy. So you could just scribble on strategy there. You comment on the change in the average values, and then have that context point as well. So it looks like there's plenty there for revenue. We haven't even looked at monitoring and maintenance yet, which is the final bit. And of course, we're told here that from March 23, so just a few months before the year end, they started to offer 2-year contracts to new and existing clients, including those whose security systems had been installed by other companies. So it's kind of two things going on here, two relatively big changes, certainly significant changes, longer contracts, and also now doing monitoring and maintenance where KUAS did not do the install. So we're told that on an annual basis, the fee for the 2-year contract is 15% lower than our normal 1-year contract. Clients are required to pay for the 2 years up front. So what this is saying is on an annual basis, the fee is 15% lower. So it's a 2-year fee. If you divide it by 2, the amount is lower than what they'd pay for 1 year. Quite common. Usually when you sign up for a longer period, that will include some sort of a discount. And we can see that there is a discount there. So actually, that would be a reason, if we look at M&M, of course, we've seen it has performed well. So that's probably one of the reasons why. So we'll include that in our reason. But if you think about that could have a negative impact on the profit margin, because they're effectively just selling their services at a lower price. Most generally renewed at the full price. So when they sell it under a 1-year contract, they actually get a higher amount of revenue, assuming costs are the same, whether they're servicing a 1-year agreement or a 2-year agreement. There's no suggestion that they would be different in any way. But of course, the revenue per year is now lower. So maybe we'll see that when we look at the gross profit. Same amount of costs, but lower revenue on a per year basis, and therefore that would have a negative impact on the gross profit margin. So we're not even doing profit yet. You might want to just kind of go down and scribble that on. If you're going to look at M&M separately, you just kind of scribble that on as a reason there from the exam scenario. Then as we work down the exam paper, we're told about stuff, recruiting more installers. Maybe just quickly skim this, but it looks all to be relevant for when we're going to be looking at gross profit and operating profit, because we're being told about cost of sales and admin costs, because we're told about more installers, sales staff, and then we're told about capital expenditure as well. So that's not going to be or unlikely to be relevant for our revenue section. Replace its fleet of vans, new cars for sales staff. And then we've got the request for advice. So in every previous case study exam, it's been possible to do the first part of the requirement without actually looking at what's in the request for advice. I mean, you may decide to give it a quick skim. It would be surprising if there was something in here which fundamentally changed the whole first part to our answer. So we should be okay to then go ahead and start typing our revenue section up. So if you've got the kind of the pro forma report, you can think about how much you're going to have. I mean, if we're saying here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see here, we might have a bit too much for revenue because we've kind of got 7 mini paragraphs here. And of course, if revenue's only 2 boxes. Now, of course, it could be 4 possibly, but not in this case, because we also need to do gross profit, operating profit, and a request for advice. So there are some scenarios where you might have, 8 or 9 mini paragraphs on revenue. But if it's just 2 boxes, we probably only need about 6. And that should be able to get us almost all of the points here under revenue. So if you were pushed for time, you could move on, because of course there's easy marks in every box, and some of these points will be quite difficult. So we don't want to spend too much time on revenue, because we want to go and make sure we can attempt these other parts and get the easy marks there as well. So certainly we're going to be focusing on the areas where we have information from the exam paper as to why something has gone up or down. And we've seen quite a few of these already, with ICAEW, certainly with M&M, and we can look at the change in the number of terminations as well. We've got Mystify forecast that we can have a look at when we're looking at ICAEW to see the impact of that. And we've got some numbers to work with that as well. And then we've also got some interesting information on tenders. So we definitely want to focus in on those. So when we're typing up our answer, so of course when we're taking it by the individual channels, as we've said, the individual activities, we want to be saying, has it gone up or down, giving the number, and then getting the reason from the exam paper. So ICAEW is increased, and give some sort of adjective, give some sort of opinion. So that's quite impressive, 7.1% growth. Reason from the exam paper. And of course, we knew that there were the construction installs and at several retailers. Like I said, you possibly could have used that as a reason for construction going up or other going up. And of course, so that's got a number, reason, and then we want to try and give like a further piece of analysis or a further insight point, and there we're looking at Mystify. So we could see that the revenue generated, because it was installed at more sites than expected, then revenue would be higher than the forecast. And then we could also see another good further insight point or trend point to look at is saying that all revenue streams have increased, because if you look at under ICAEW, you can see that they have all increased during the year. And as we discussed previously, what we're trying to do here is, this is the mark for the number. So we've got those, and if you put the absolute number and the percentage, and it should be a bit of a backup to make sure that you definitely get that nice easy point there. And then we're trying to get one of the reasons quite often in here. And you can see here that unfortunately we've mentioned 2 reasons and they're backslash. So we only get like 1 mark because that's just 1 point. So that can be a little bit frustrating when that happens, but that's just, all part of it. Ideally it would have been quite nice if we had number, reason, and the further insight point was a separate one. but that's just the way it goes, and we'll certainly pick up enough points overall. And then we'll do the same thing with M&M. So M&M, I'd like to not just say the same thing, increased impressively over and over again. So you could say, it's continued strong growth. You're almost effectively implying the trend there because you're saying it's continued strong growth. Then reason, and then the reason, of course, from the exam paper where we can, offering discounted 2-year contracts and working on systems that they did not install. And then what would be a further insight point or a further bit of analysis? We could look at the change in the terminations. And that, of course, suggests that this policy has reduced the terminations. I mean, terminations are lower. The only thing we really know about what's happened in a year of M&M is, of course, that there has been this change. And again, we're doing the same thing. So, number, and then there's a mark here for the terminations down, due to the longer contracts. So we picked up that point in there as well. And then we just go through all of them. So construction, because I've already used that reason there about Bowen, I wouldn't use it again. There'll only be one mark for it. So we've given the number, and then I've almost gone straight onto the further analysis in that we've looked at, average revenue per install, said that's gone down, and that's obviously due to the decision to focus on lower value tenders. And then here I've got a context point. So you don't need it at the end of every mini paragraph, but at least after like 4 or 5, you should have like a good context point. And of course, some of these are identifiable, from the AI really about the strong construction sector. And we'll come back to overall revenue where there are some there as well. So you can see that, construction with the number. We've also looked at average revenue per tender. Unfortunately, that ended up getting backslash, but that could have been in this box. So unfortunate, but another time, we will get 2 marks for it. And then a context point as well about the construction sector. And you can see you can just go through the others. Like I said, if you are a bit pushed for time, maybe don't include the one where there isn't a particular reason from the exam paper or it isn't that significant. Maybe upgrades, but it's still picking up marks here every time for the number. So you've got other, and we've just done the same thing. So we've got the number with a reason. But again, that's kind of the same, the focus on lower value tenders. So I shouldn't really have used that again, but that was kind of the only reason. Further insight is looking at what proportion of clients have opted for M&M, and that's obviously increased. You could do a quick calculation there. I mean, that's really easy to do, just looking at the proportion of clients who have opted for M&M. You can see that again, it's still like the vast majority, and that's even higher than it was in a previous year. If you just take that and divide it by this amount, you can see how many as a percentage. And of course, you can kind of see it from the numbers. If that's gone up by 15.8%, that's gone up by 4.3%, you can see even more are taking monitoring and maintenance rather than just maintenance. So that's an interesting point. And again, something that we've picked up from the AIs. That's something quite useful to do there, and something you can have thought about in advance. So again, you can go through and do other, can do upgrades as well, picking up marks, trying to get some context points at the end as well. And of course, we thought the tender, and in fact, there was another M&M reason there. So we actually got two for that because we mentioned them both. Yes, both were on the exam paper. So then as we keep going through, we thought tender success was really important to look at because there was a lot of information given in the exam paper about this. And also because that is a kind of a key metric. We know that the business has been looking at this key metric. So that was an important area for them to look at to assess performance. And we can see there's been a significant change. And also there's a reason why. There was a information in the exam paper that said there was a focus on lower value tenders. So you could comment that it has achieved that aim. And you can look at like the average value as well. So they've got the tender success rate up, but the average value is of course lower. So they continue to win that slightly lower value work. And of course, higher value jobs go to tender. So you can see that here as well, that the average value of successful tender is more than the average revenue per install. And you could, if you've got time, look at mix as well. And as you've said, if you look at mix, then of course that shift towards M&M, because it's higher margin, will increase the gross profit margin, as we've discussed previously. So you could see that if you look at the the tender value as well, and you can see like higher success rate. You comment on that strategy that they've decided to focus on lower value tenders. You can pick up this bit here, and the tender success rate, of course, given marks here as well. So you can kind of see how we pick up all of those points by following this technique. Number, reason, further analysis, further insight point or trend, and then context point. So we're doing 4 things, every time. So number, reason, looking at some further analysis if you've got some more numbers to work with or other information to work with, or picking out the trend or looking at the significance of a number, and then ideally being able to get some context points as well. The strong construction sector would be one, or most clients opt for M&M. I mean, that might be more further analysis. So you can see how we can, as we go through, if we're kind of doing this, we're trying to get points here, and points in this box as well. Like I've said, sometimes it's frustrating, things gets backslashed, or you might make a point which isn't on the marking key. And if either of those 2 things happen, it's just hard luck. You've seen there with my answer, I had 2 good points there, but I only get 1 mark for it. And there's other points I put which weren't on the marking key, but that's just the way it works. But you can see that overall clearly picked up, more than enough points here. So I certainly would do overall revenue first, but I just wanted to go through those first of all, because with overall revenue, because we're going to analyze each activity separately, we're not going to give a detailed reason why overall revenue went up. We're not going to say overall revenue went up and then say because of Boeing, because of Mystify, and all of these reasons, because we're using those reasons down here. So really with overall revenue, we're just going to say what it's gone up by. And I like to give the headline number, like the current year absolute number, when looking at like key headline numbers like revenue and profit, because I think you would in a real report, but usually you don't actually have to do that. So if you really do struggle with time, then you should be okay just having the increase. But I think in a proper report you would have the key headline number. So rather than giving a specific reason, we could do things like compare it to the forecast growth for the industry. And that's certainly what I would do first of all, of overall revenue. Has it exceeded the 3%? Yes, it has. We know that the subdued economy may have a negative impact. So we definitely want to have that as effectively like a context point and compare the rate of growth to the previous year. And then we can mention as well that because growth is really high, so I think it's really unlikely that they're going to have higher growth than the previous year. But just remember that previous year growth, so the growth in 2022 was so high because 2021 was so low because of COVID. So therefore you could tie that in with a COVID point by saying growth was artificially high due to the impact of COVID. So that's kind of expected. So you'd expect growth to be lower than the previous year because the previous year growth was artificially high because of COVID. And then we could mention any other context points. So demand is affected by perception of growth in crime, which of course has increased. We knew that the major client wins at the end of the previous year. And again, as I said, as like a trend point, you can see whether all revenue streams have increased. So when you're doing overall revenue, just remember, if you've got the pro forma report, then of course you're thinking, comparing it against the industry, make a point about the economy in there as well, compare the growth to the previous year, and maybe comment, the fact that that's expected because of the exceptionally high growth in 2022. Context point, and then also maybe look at a trend point. Have all revenue streams gone up or down, or is growth due to volume rather than price? That would be a good point that of course we could mention in this one here, because when you look at the numbers, like we saw there, that actually revenue per installation was actually lower. So, the growth is all due to increases in volume, more installations, or certainly of installations, it's due to volume. And actually with monitoring and maintenance, presumably as well, because it's they have kind of discounted the prices on those 2-year contracts. Of course, you should pick up some of these points. And again, you can see, very frustrating, isn't it? I made this point and I made this point, but they're backslash, you only get 1 mark for it. But at least, if I did make a silly mistake with one of these numbers, at least I've got the other one to kind of back me up. And actually, you get a point for using it, for bringing it in, just picking it up from the AI, but actually actively using it is another point here as well. But again, subdued economy, and COVID were all kind of backslashed. So again, only 1 point there as well. Could have mentioned that point about some construction projects being delayed. So you can kind of see that revenue section, it's actually picked up, all of the points really that were available there. So a great start there in the exam. But some of the points are really hard. So, maybe some of the points, in this box in particular. So don't spend too long on your revenue section. There's plenty of easy marks elsewhere in this requirement and in the other requirements as well. So across the whole paper, you want to make sure you get all the easy and medium marks, grab all the low hanging fruit. Don't try to get kind of every single point. Don't try and do like a perfect revenue section, because some of these points are difficult to get. So you're better off moving on within time, and then so that you've got enough time to attempt the other parts and to pick up the easy and medium marks there. So of course we'll then come on, and we've already thought about, yes, we're going to have a gross profit section. So again, I think with requirement 1, you almost have to kind of hold yourself back a bit. You have to be quite disciplined, because it would be very easy to just kind of go through and calculate the numbers you will go through the numbers and calculate them for, all of the main costs. But there's a temptation to just kind of write on all of them, but you'll just run out of time, and not all of them will be on the marking key. If you think about the marking key, if you've got effectively 6 points, because a lot of them follow through here, they're only going to look at kind of 6 different kind of cost lines, because this is more for the evaluation. So you're going to need to think quite carefully about which ones are you going to focus on, because some of them will be like backslashed, for example. So when we go through and you do your analysis, we're going to do cost of sales. So again, just as we did with revenue, of course, you can just go through and pick up the 2023 numbers. You might want to do gross profit at the same time. Your AI analysis, of course, you've got all of the prior year numbers, so you've got those ready to put in and just do those in exactly the same way. But then when you're deciding which ones you're actually going to include in your report, of course, we're kind of following that same principle that I explained earlier. Which ones are like the most significant overall? Like which are the most significant costs? Obviously, you can think of kind of labor as almost kind of being one, but certainly subcontractor is quite low here. Purchases is a big cost. It's a significant part of cost of sales. You could look at cost of sales mix, or you could look at a percentage of revenue. So that's quite a significant cost. We know that. So you could look at the absolute number, but look at the change. Which ones had the significant change? We're definitely going to look at labor, because there's been quite a shift there towards direct labor away from subcontractors. You could even look at the labor mix between the two. So that's had a significant change. It's a significant number overall. And the other thing that we're looking for is areas where there's a reason given in the exam paper. We know there's something on staff. So that almost like ticks all 3 boxes. It's a significant number. It's in a significant change in the year, and there's a reason from the exam paper. So I definitely am going to be including this in my analysis in cost of sales. I definitely want to include this in my report. Purchases kind of maybe, like, it's a big cost. It hasn't, has it seen a significant change? You might think, oh, that's quite a significant change. But actually, what did revenue go up by? 9.4%. So actually, you'd expect purchases to go up by about the same. And therefore, you can see as a percentage of revenue, it hasn't really changed much. We're not given any information in the exam paper about purchases. So there's not really that much we can say. Purchases have gone up by 8.7%, and then what's our reason? Well, there isn't any. We don't really know. We don't know that much about what's included. Well, we know what's included in there, but a reason why, has prices from a particular supplier gone up, or a change of supplier. We're not told about anything about that. So there isn't really that much of interest to say there. But certainly with labour, I'm definitely going to want to include that. I mean, you could look at cost of sales by each activity, but what I prefer to do, if you're given a particular reason, then yes, okay, you can do that. But what I prefer to do would be to look at, gross profit by activity. And of course, the other thing we can look at with labour, which is interesting, is we can do average direct labour costs. So we were told, we had a quick skim, didn't we? But we saw that they were investing in people, recruited 19 more installers, engineers, and operatives, and monitoring operatives at the start of the year. This reduced reliance on subcontractors, that gives us a reason why subcontractor costs have gone down, which we were keen to do following several instances of inappropriate behaviour towards female staff. We obviously saw that in the AI, in one of the media articles when Orly went undercover. We also employed 4 more sales staff, so that's going to be in admin costs, help with the increased workload, presumably like the additional tenders. Total pay was 710k, commissions were there, so we're definitely going to use that when we're looking at our operating profit. So actually you can see that the increase in the number of staff, I guess you could have probably just worked it out, the prior year number, the increase in staff. So you could have worked it out that way. But of course, as we know from the AI, that information was provided. So look to see if it's provided in the exam paper. And we can see there that we have it included there. So then you can work out the average direct labour cost. Again, adding something of a bit more interest to labour. So we're definitely going to do labour. We might as well comment on subcontract at the same time, because we've got a reason why that went down, because they intentionally moved away from using subcontractors. But direct labour, we've got the reason from the exam paper. We could look at it as a percentage of revenue, but we can look at the average direct labour cost, which of course, as we've seen from the numbers, that's increased. So that's quite interesting to look at, looking at the average cost. We could comment on staff sickness as well, because like we said, we want to try and integrate some of this non-financial data into our answer, so we can try and kind of tie it in with that. I think this applies to all staff, so you could have it in cost of sales, or you could have it when we look at head office staff costs down in admin. So lots to look at there on labour, so we can look at the staff sickness. And then, of course, we've got good context points. We know the changes that happened in the previous year. So definitely going to look at that number, direct labour and subcontractor costs. And then when we calculate the gross profit margins, you can look at gross profit overall in absolute terms. But of course, we know revenue went up for ICAEW, and we know it went up for M&M by more. So of course, you'd expect the gross profit to increase. If it doesn't, that would indicate a significant change in the margin, and that's what we want to look at. Let's focus on the gross profit margin. We can comment on the absolute numbers, but let's focus on the gross profit margin. And we can see that for ICAEW, it's gone up slightly. For M&M, it's gone down, and we've already thought of a reason for that, because we said about they're discounting some of the contracts now, so same cost but lower revenue on an annual basis, and therefore that would cause the margin to go down. But overall, the margin's going up. So we said, what would be causing the overall margin going up? Well, revenue mix is shifting more towards the more profitable stream. Yes, M&M's margin has gone down in the year compared to last year, but it's still considerably more profitable than ICAEW work. So we can see that the mix shifting towards M&M, would of course have a positive impact on the gross profit margin. Although the fact that M&M's margin has gone down has had a downward impact, that's obviously being more than offset by the benefits of the change in the mix. And of course, ICAEW is, of course, that margin has gone up as well, so it's having a positive impact. So there's a few kind of counterbalancing forces going on here with the gross profit margin. So it's really important that you do think about the revenue mix when you're looking at gross profit, you're looking at the margin. You can, of course, look at whether all cost of sales lines are going up or down and as a percentage of revenue. but look at the change in the margins of the two streams individually, but thinking about that change in the revenue mix and what impact that would have on each, on the overall gross profit margin, so the effect of the revenue mix shifting towards the more profitable stream or away from the more profitable stream. And of course, we did say, we can get some reasons for each of them. So M&M gross profit margin, that's gone down. Of course, we've got a reason for that. So I probably would look at these separately. We've got the reason from the exam paper. We could look at the false alarms as well, because we've got that metric and we know that that can have an impact on M&M costs. So that could cause more costs if false alarms are going up. And we know we've got an industry benchmark figure there as well that we can tie in there. And of course, we can comment on the trend. Now, ICAEW, we know that's gone up. So what's the reason that that gross profit margin has gone up? Well, similar principle, if you think about the revenue mix, because we know it's moving towards construction, and we know construction has a higher profit margin than the others. So typically 40% gross profit margin and revenue mix is shifting towards construction. So you've got that on the pro forma report to remind you, but that's definitely something worth looking at. And of course, we know Mystify's high margin when we've analysed that in the exhibit, 50% gross profit margin. So if there's more of those sales, that means more revenue is at 50% gross profit margin. So that would push the average up as well. So I think it was definitely worth stripping these out, doing overall gross profit, ICAEW and M&M separately. And if we were going to do the labour costs, that's kind of like 5 points on just gross profit. And bearing in mind we need to do admin as well, you could even argue, maybe that is a bit too much, but I'd have to see what the admin numbers look like when we get onto those. But again, you can see, same exam technique really, particularly with the cost of sales. So look at cost of sales overall, say what it's gone up or down by, but then compare that with the revenue growth, because that will have an impact on the gross profit margin. So cost of sales is going up, overall cost of sales in total is going up by less than revenue. So that will cause the gross profit margin to go up. The costs are going up, but revenue is going up by more, and therefore the profit margin will be higher. So usually we'll get the mark here. I mean, that can just be in the appendix, but cost of sales, and then there's usually a mark here for comparing it to revenue. And then we'll just go through the cost one by one, similar to like we did with revenue, direct labour with the number. So increased, you could see, I wouldn't necessarily say it's disappointing. Obviously, you'd prefer a cost would stay flat, but you'd expect it to go up. If there's more activity, then obviously labour costs are going to go up. If there's more installations, and obviously you need the labour to do those installations. So reading from the exam paper, 19 more staff. Then you could look at it as a percentage of revenue. Obviously, it looks like a big jump, but that's, of course, because they're using less subcontractors. So it doesn't necessarily indicate poor cost control, because there's kind of like a shift in the mix. It'd be more to see whether it's poor cost control or not. It would be better to actually look at the labour as a percentage of revenue, total labour, so direct and subcontractor labour as a percentage of revenue. You can see it's actually been well controlled because it's lower. So yes, direct labour has gone up as a percentage of revenue, but subcontractor has gone down. So it's just shifting costs from here to here, but actually the overall labour cost is lower as a percentage of revenue, which suggests that actually using direct labour is more efficient, and that's something we were told, of course, in the AI. And of course, you can look at the average direct labour cost, and that's gone up. So, the average amount that they're paying to staff has gone up. Not clear whether that includes employer costs as well, like national insurance and things like that. We won't get into the detailed technicalities in this exam or things like that. But you can see here that the average direct labour cost has gone up. And we knew that, of course, that's because they were given improved pay and working conditions. We knew that from the AI. So staff sickness is up, but it's below the national average. We know the national average is slightly above 2.7%, because we know that this is slightly below the national average, but it's lower now. And again, this is kind of a good context point, the improved paying conditions. It's kind of like a context point. It's kind of like a reason as well why average direct labour cost has gone up and staff sickness has gone down. So you can see that direct labour, we've got the number, again, that's been backslashed with the percentage of revenue. Working out average cost or doing total labour as a percentage of revenue. But we've got, the number, the reason, the further insight with the average cost. And then we got the context point as well. So quite well rewarded for that section. And then you can do subcontractors. So contractors down, intended strategy to reduce the use of subcontractors. And of course, there's efficiencies from lower subcontractor use. And I'll explain how that's kind of indicated in the looking at labour costs as a percentage of total revenue. So I kind of skipped purchases. Maybe it would be on the marking key. It actually was as well, so a bit frustrating there. Maybe I shouldn't have skipped it, but you can see my justification as to why, and I'd want to kind of move on and within time, so I can attempt every part of each requirement and get the easy marks on each. And so as we said with gross profit, we can look at gross profit overall. That's quite an impressive increase, but what's important is focus on the margin, and the margin's gone up, which is really good. Why did the gross profit margin go up? Well, like I've explained, revenue mix moved towards a higher margin M&M work, and it continues on its upward trend. That's an important point to pick up. Obviously, we've seen in the previous years that the gross profit margin has increased overall. So, of course, we could mention whether that continues on that upward trend, which is obviously very positive. And then we can look at gross profit by each activity. So ICAEW, it was up in absolute terms. Focus on the margin, it's up. And the reason it was up, revenue mix shifted towards construction and the higher margin on Mystify sales. And it's ended its declining trend. So it had been going down prior to that. So we've seen a decline in the profit margin for ICAEW. And then M&M, again, profit up, but look at the margin. What's the reason? Discounted contracts and false alarms had gone up as well. But it's still below the industry average, and it hasn't continued its upward trend, or the upward trend has now ceased. So again, you can see here that we've got it here. So you could have looked at the cost of sales number, but they also gave credit for looking at the margin, or also looking at the absolute gross profit movements. We've got each of those, and then this is for identifying the impact of the mix or the discounted contracts in there as well. And we've brought in the false alarms, we've used that, and we also use the staff sickness as well. So we finish our cost of sales and gross profit section. So we've done quite well there, and then we can move on and do our operating profit section. Again, in exactly the same way, really. We know that we've got a reason from the exam paper on staff. We had this capital expenditure as well. We knew that was all about like new vehicles, new cars for sales staff. Other capex was minimal. You might want to have a look at the cash flow statement and see what they spend acquisition on PPE. So we've got that there, but we don't need to analyze cash or look at working capital in this requirement. So we're not going to go into too much detail there. But of course, where we might see that having an impact if we're analysing operating profit is, of course, when we're looking at admin expenses, and we can see here that there is vehicle repair costs. So they're reduced from what they were in the previous years. When we calculate the numbers, we'll see that they're lower. But we've got the different amounts here. So similar as when we talked about the cost of sales costs, the costs which are presented in cost of sales, we're going to look at the cost number overall. So head office staff has gone up. Obviously, we knew some additional staff were taken on, so we told some information there. We can obviously work out the average payroll cost as well. If we take like the head office staff number, we've got the employees, including the directors. But if you strip the directors out, number of employees, excluding the directors, you can look at the average payroll cost. You can work out the average cost paid per director as well. If we were kind of looking at that, nothing that significant there. We could look at the average payroll cost. That's the average cost has gone up as well as the absolute, suggesting that they're being paid more. Of course, we've got the reason from that, and we've already used that, so probably wouldn't use it again. But we could tie in the information that we're given here about sales staff in our answer here. So I definitely would look at that. I mean, it's the largest number out of all of them. It's obviously a fixed cost as well, well, primarily fixed head office staff. So unlike the installers, where to do more installation work, need more installers, need more engineers. To do more monitoring work, need more operatives, presumably, but within reason. But of course, head office staff, that's more of a fixed cost. We're told that in the AI, so that necessarily won't increase with activity. So obviously, if activity goes up, more revenue, these costs won't necessarily go up. So you'd expect to see them declining as a percentage of revenue. Obviously, the opposite would be true, as is the case of operating gearing, high fixed costs. If activity falls, these costs won't fall in line with activity, so then become a higher share of revenue. And of course, that would reduce the profit margin. Because if activity is going up, more revenue, costs stay broadly fixed, and that will cause the gross profit margin to go up. So you can see by looking at a percentage of revenue whether they are behaving like fixed costs. So definitely be commenting on that. One, because it's the most significant number. Two, because it has a significant impact on the profit margin because the costs are fixed. What we're told, they're primarily fixed. And certainly in this case, I'll be commenting on that because we're given a reason from the exam paper. So definitely looking at that number. And then the others, there have been some quite big changes. So vehicle repair costs are down significantly. So I want to comment on that. Even though it's not a big number, there's been a big change and we've got a reason from the exam paper because they've obviously got the new fleet of vehicles. The receivables impairment, that's kind of quite unique to this case study business. Don't really see that in every single case study, impairments of receivables, and that's dropped quite a lot. So we can comment on that. Maybe there's been some better credit control, or maybe we'll find something out. Marketing, we know that'll be tender costs, will be included in there as well. So 16.2%. So that's slightly up as a percentage of revenue, but not that much to say there. So I might skip that one. Depreciation, obviously, there's not much to say there. Probably a bit higher because of the new additions. And then R&D, that's quite interesting to look at because, of course, we know from the AI what the forecast was there. So it'd be good to comment on whether that's above or below the forecast, and we can actually see it's perfectly in line. So I'll comment on R&D, comment on payroll, and try and comment on these two as well. But you can kind of see that the trap I'm falling into, I'm probably am doing a little bit too much here for two boxes. And like I say, people often do this. They do too much for requirement one. They want to comment on every number, and you do have to kind of hold yourself back a bit. So if you were overrunning with time, you might have to decide to skip one of these. And you can see that, actually on the marking key, a lot of them are backslashed. So actually, if I do head office, IT and other, and R&D, that's only got me one mark. You can see there is a separate evaluation point here on head office staff, like looking at the average cost or saying it's because of additional staff. And then also talking about the new vans, reduced repairs, or the impairment, or the R&D in line with the forecast. But a lot of these have been backslashed, and you can't always guarantee it'll be the admin that gets backslashed more than the cost of sales. But you can kind of see why that trying to do everything won't necessarily get you more marks. There's only so many marks on a requirement, so things are going to have to be backslashed. But I did it in exactly the same way. So I looked at overall admin. So did it go faster and slower than revenue, and the impact that would have on the operating profit margin for the same reasons I've explained above. And then we've got head office staff. So the number with the reason. You can look at it as a percentage of revenue, but looking at that average payroll cost. And then we can see here, we could comment on the sales commission. I mean, you could work with these numbers in different ways. But of course, we knew from the AI it's typically between 10 and 20% of total pay. That's now 20%. The numbers were quite easy to work with. You might even possibly be able to do that in your head. Obviously, if you, 10% is obviously 71,000, and that's double that. So it's obviously 20% of total pay. But you can see, number, reason, further insight points, kind of a couple of further insight points there. And you could do the same thing with the IT and the other costs, due to the receivables impairment going down and vehicle costs going down due to new vans. R&D, has gone down. It's in line with the forecast. You could mention, that's probably not a good thing, or definitely isn't, it isn't necessarily a good thing that R&D costs have gone down, because that is an investment. They invest with these strategic partners, and that results in new products and higher revenue. Now, we don't need to start really thinking about IAS 38 and whether these costs should be capitalized because they're like development costs that will lead to future economic benefits. We're not concerned with the statutory financial reporting here. These are management accounts. These aren't like published accounts where they have to follow the financial reporting standards. So if management decide they just want to write all the costs off, they can do that, because these accounts are for internal purposes. So they're not following financial reporting standards. But we know the reality is this is effectively an investment, because they incur these R&D costs, results in new products, results in higher revenue. So actually cutting this cost isn't a good thing. Cutting maybe like premises costs, is a good thing, because that is just a pure expenditure. But these R&D costs are actually more like an investment. Obviously, it's good to keep them as low as you can whilst yielding the same benefits. But they shouldn't be cut, because obviously they are an investment and deliver a return. So you can see, you just go through these costs in the same way. Then when you look at operating profit, we can do it in the same way as we did for gross profit. So up or down, number. Again, I like to give the headline number for these big key numbers like revenue, gross profit, operating profit. Focus on the margin, it's gone up. Why has the operating profit margin gone up? Well, as I've explained, head office costs are primarily fixed, and they're not moving in line with activity. And we can see now, of course, that operating profit margin is now on that upward trend. So really thinking now, I think with operating profit, has activity changed, or is revenue higher or lower? And therefore, is that feeding through into the operating profit margin? When you think about the interaction with the fixed costs, so those staff costs, which are a major cost for the business, these head office costs, we're expecting those to stay broadly flat. So therefore, changes in activity, changes in revenue are going to have a more marked impact on this company, because the costs are fixed. So if revenue is really going up, we're going to see an increase in the profit margin, because the cost wouldn't have gone up as much as revenue. But the opposite is true. If revenue goes down, these costs are fixed, then of course the operating profit margin will fall quite significantly. It's a large cost there, those head office staff costs. And you can see there we've got a mark there for looking at the margin, the operating profit margin. So you can see how we've picked up, most of these points. A lot of this is in the appendix. We've done all this analysis by tender, revenue per installation, etc. So we've got all of those points, got the points here. So we've done really well on requirement one anyway. But you can see, why to not spend too much time on it, because some of the points are backslashed. Some of the points are hard. You want to make sure that you get all the easy and medium points and move on within time, so you can get the easy and the medium points elsewhere. So having completed the financial statement analysis part of the question, we can now move on and look at the request for advice. So bear in mind that this is worth 2 boxes, and we've already done really well on requirement 1 already. So don't find this part too overwhelming. It's only worth 2 boxes. There are plenty of easy marks, of course, to get elsewhere, as we've kind of shown here with all of these parts of the requirement. So of course, you definitely should attempt it. There's plenty of easy marks to get in there, but there are some very difficult marks as well. So what you certainly shouldn't do is spend lots of time trying to redo it or redo any calculations to trying to get it absolutely correct, because it's performing exceptionally well here really isn't important for passing the exam overall. You just want to make sure you get the easy and medium marks, across every section. You don't need to do anything particularly exceptional to score a high mark in this case study exam. The key is getting coverage across all of the different boxes. So certainly don't fall into the trap of trying to do too much here. So we're told that during the year, we became aware of financial difficulties at Ringstar, who of course we know from the AI. Following the installation of Mystify at 40 Ringstar stores, as was expected, between July and November 22, Ringstar exceeded the 50-day payment terms specified in the contract between KUAS and Ringstar. The credit control team have been in continuous contact with the management at Ringstar, who have explained that the business has suffered a downturn in recent months due to worsening economic conditions, reducing demand for jewellery. Ringstar have said that they are working on a recovery plan with their bank. However, no amounts have been paid to KUAS, and the full installation fee of $6,000 per store, which again is what we were expecting it to be from the AI, 40 stores, 6,000 per store, is still outstanding. So the full amount is outstanding. So we can obviously work out the total amount there. The board now considers it unlikely that payment will be received from Ringstar within the next 6 months, and are particularly concerned about the impact this could have on profit and cash. So they think it unlikely that payment will be received within the next 6 months. So I don't think that's suggesting that they think it's unlikely that they'll ever receive payment, but it certainly says that. So a little bit unclear about whether they're actually going to receive payment or not. So the full amount owed by Ringstar for the 40 installations is included within trade receivables. So obviously KUAS has gone and installed Mystify, expecting to be paid $6,000 per store, 40 stores, but the amount still hasn't been paid, and it's been in trade receivables now for a very long time. If that's between July and November, and we're now in June. So KUAS has paid Goff for the purchases under the terms of the arrangement between KUAS and Goff. So you can see that Goff has been paid under the terms of that agreement. So their percentage of the sales price is KUAS who hasn't been paid by Ringstar. So please advise us on the impact this could have on operating profit and cash. So of course, with the receivables written off, that will reduce operating profit. And if they don't receive the money, then obviously that's going to have an adverse impact on cash, because they won't be receiving that cash that they had been expected to receive from the sale, and obviously they've paid out for the purchases. Any other related issues that the board should be aware of, and the actions that should be taken. So you can kind of use this to like drive your answer. And one thing I quite like doing when there's almost like little subheadings like this is have these as little subheadings in the report. So impact on operating profit and cash, other issues, and recommendations as well. We'd always have some recommendations for the issue. So obviously you can do some calculations with the numbers. So obviously, really easy there. If you're told, 40 stores, 6,000 per store, then you can work out the total amount of 240K. That's the total trade receivables balance. So you can see how significant the amount is. That is quite a significant amount of trade receivables. We know what operating profit is before any impairment. So if it's impaired, that's going to reduce operating profit down to this. So reduce the receivable. You don't need to set out the double entry, but obviously credit receivable, debit P&L. And that would be the operating profit margin after. Of course, we saw as well that the impairment was quite low for the year, so maybe they haven't fully provided for any receivables impairment yet. So you can see that would be the impact on operating profit. I mean, cash, there's not going to be like a cash outflow because the receiver wasn't being paid. But of course, cash receipts in the future, are going to be lower because they're not going to be paid this receivable, which of course they were expecting to receive. So you could just start off with, some of the basics. First of all, if the receivable is impaired, it will reduce operating profit by 240K to this. You can say what the operating profit margin is, and whilst it reduces operating profit, you can still see there's a healthy profit for the year, operating profit margin is still better than the previous year. So it obviously has an adverse impact. It reduces operating profit, but it's not like catastrophic. It doesn't turn the profit into a loss, or doesn't like half the operating profit or anything like that. So they wanted operating profit and also cash. So clients not paying or paying late obviously has an adverse impact on cash. And you can look at the cash position of the company. I mean, we would need to do this anyway for requirements 2 and 3. So you can see what the cash position is. You can see what cash is, of course, at the year end, or you could just pick it up from the cash flow statement. You could have a quick skim through the cash flow statement. So similar to previous years, healthy profit before tax, non-cash items in there such as depreciation. The working capital changes, dominated by trade receivables, so an increase there. And then, after tax has been paid from the previous year, that leaves a nice healthy cash from operations. We know there was some capex in the year. I mean, the other amounts are quite insignificant. The dividend, which of course gets paid every year, so it generated a healthy amount of cash in the year, a healthy amount of cash at the year end. So it's a very cash generative year. So you could say a healthy cash balance generated a good amount of cash in the year. So it isn't going to have too significant an impact. Obviously, it has an adverse impact because they're not going to receive that amount as they were expecting. But we can see that the cash position is very healthy. So not receiving that amount when they thought they would hasn't had too much of an adverse impact. And we were also asked to think about other issues. We'd always do this, calculate any numbers you can, what's the impact on the accounts, how significant is it? We think about kind of the business impact as well. We, of course, know Ringstar has been like a key client in recent years. One of the clients that we're told about specifically in the exhibit, where we've got details on some of the clients in Exhibit 8. We're told some information about Ringstar since 2017. Mystify has been trialed there, and that seems to have gone well. So there is a long-term relationship there. So client since 2017, long-term relationship. So as we'll see more of in requirement 2 and 3, it's useful to mention what do we know about the parties who are involved here, and of course how it might link back to the risks and strategies in Exhibit 12. And of course, we know that that's a key risk around clients not paying on time. So we could bring that in. So clients not paying on time was a previously identified risk. And, current mitigation policies have not prevented this issue. So we know, of course, and we even told some of this in the exam paper, of course, that that there has been some discussion between the credit control team and management there. Credit control team have been in continuous contact. That doesn't seem to have resolved the issue. And then in terms of other issues, we'd already noticed that the receivables impairment was low in the current year compared to the previous year. And when we looked at those numbers, we saw the receivables impairment was considerably lower. But when you actually look at the receivables balance, and you look at trade receivables days, it has gone up. So the impairment looks low compared to the previous year, and also as a percentage of receivables. But we can see here that trade receivables days have gone up. So that's perhaps might indicate that customers have been slow paying, and that there could be a need for further impairment of balances. So receivables days are up, which suggests other clients are slow paying, and that may require impairment. The impairment's low within the previous year. And perhaps a trickier point to get is if you remember that we were told here that customers who are opting for the 2 years contract for M&M and getting a discounted price on an annual basis, they pay up front. So currently M&M customers pay monthly. So this is, of course, is more beneficial for KUAS in terms of cash. So you could have mentioned that point as well. That was probably a difficult point to think of. I mean, you could possibly mention something about the cash outflow from the vehicles as well. But certainly calculating the main numbers that they led you towards, like the impact of an impairment, the impact on cash, and a few other issues. What do we know about the parties involved? is there anything else we know from the AI? This was a previously identified risk. And actually, if you looked at the trade receivables days overall, this suggested that other amounts might need impairing. And we'd kind of already seen that a little bit because we had, of course, seen that the impairment itself was lower this year. And then some sensible recommendations, so like legal advice, look at other balances for impairment, stricter payment terms, perhaps. But it is kind of quite difficult, this box here, but you should have been able to pick up some of the easier marks, impact on operating profit, the cash balance. You might not have gone as far as trade receivables days, but it's an identified risk. And then some action points as well. Should have been able to pick up a few points in here. There are a few easy points, which are worth getting. And of course, you'll need a point for your conclusion. So you can't just not attempt it at all. Really important that you do attempt this. So when we come down onto our conclusions, we want to make sure that we conclude on every section. So of course, you can kind of think back, and this is a good time to kind of reflect and think, well, what was the requirement? The requirement was to look at revenue by each activity and in total, gross profit, each activity in total, operating profit, and the request for advice. And we let that requirement wording drive our headings. And we should always do that with all requirements. So we had a heading for revenue, one for gross profit, one for operating profit, and then one for the ringstar issue. So we need to make sure we have a conclusion on each of those sections. And remember that they wanted it revenue overall and by activity. So therefore, we're going to take the main point from each section. Now, don't copy everything. You shouldn't copy everything from your revenue section. This isn't a copy and paste exercise. What we want is the main headline numbers. So we want the main headline number in our conclusions for revenue by each activity and in total. So what you can do is take the main point. So overall revenue is up, and the brief comment with it. So we could just take this point here. So then we've got the main point on overall revenue in our conclusions. We don't need all of our analysis on overall revenue, just the main number with a brief comment. So with the other ones at ICAEW, we can just take the reason as the number and the reason. And then M&M, number with the reason why. Construction, with the reason why. And then we could also comment on tender success as well, or you could leave that for the exec summary. I mean, because there's quite a significant movement there, that is quite interesting to have. And then we do the same thing for cost of sales and gross profit. Again, we just want the main headline numbers. So you could just come straight in and put in overall gross profit. So the number with the change in the margin and maybe the brief reason why. So leaving off this final point. ICAEW, number with the margin and a brief reason why. M&M number, margin and brief reason why. And then operating profit, number, reason, brief reason why. So you can see that what we end up with is we've got it overall revenue and we've got it by each activity as well. So ICAEW and M&M. And also included like the subsections from ICAEW as well by their kind of client type as well. So it might ask for that as well. Specifically in some requirements, we've kind of included it in here as well. But you can see you haven't copied everything from the above section, just the main headline number and a brief reason why. And then with gross profit, overall gross profit, and again, by each activity. So we've got ICAEW, and then we've got M&M. We can see, I haven't taken everything from here, just like the main headline number. That's all it needs to be in the conclusion. It's a concluding point, the main number, and the main reason why it's gone up or down. Similarly with operating profit. And then similarly with the ringstar point, just the main points, which are like the impact on operating profit and cash. That's what they asked for, as well as other issues, but these are the main two. So we've taken those main points there, the impact on operating profit and the impact on cash. As you can see, that's what the conclusion will require. So total revenue, revenue by activity, and then we've got profit, and then we've got the ringstar issue as well to pick up those 4 points. And then what we need is some sensible action points. So I think particularly with requirement one, you might have been able to think of some of these in advance. But obviously the ones to include depend what's happened in the year. It's all very well thinking, in advance, or a great thing to suggest is to contact other clients, regarding Mystify, to get it installed at other clients. But of course, that's only a good recommendation or a sensible recommendation if the trial was successful and they're going to expand it. So you need to think about what's happened in the year. Similarly, you could focus on growing a particular activity, but focus on the one which is performing well. Or if one of them's declined, investigate the reasons why. So if installation is doing well, win more installation work. If construction is still doing well, win more construction work. It could offer longer M&M contracts or servicing non-KUAS installs. But, of course, that depends on what's happened in the year. It's no good suggesting these here because they've already done that. So you can see why you need to think of action points based on what's happened in the scenario. I mean, increasing R&D investment is a good one here because, of course, we know that that's reduced in the year. We wouldn't suggest replacing vans because they've just got a new fleet. So it's always good to suggest doing some further analysis. So we can't really do profit analysis by each client category. And even with the revenue analysis, we haven't got a detailed breakdown between retail and leisure. So we could do some more revenue analysis there, and certainly profit analysis by client category. We know construction's higher, but we don't know about the others. So that's a good thing to suggest, doing some further analysis, getting some more data to do some further analysis. That's usually worth a mark there. Of course, Mystify's done well, so contact other clients regarding it would be a good one to suggest. We saw the installations are up and they're doing well, so could win more installation work. We saw false alarms have gone up, so increase client training to reduce false alarms because that will help reduce M&M costs. Tender success, you could increase sales staff commissions even more because of course we know they're 10 to 20% of pay, so maybe they're kind of maxed out now at their bonus. We don't know if that's definitely the rule, but maybe suggest increasing that a bit further. And we saw that the R&D looked low, so therefore find more strategic alliance partners, or increase R&D investment, and maybe continue with the longer M&M contracts because that seems to be helping reduce terminations and seemed to be increasing M&M revenue. So you can see your recommendations are action points based on the scenario. So think about what's happened in the year. What's the big picture that's happened in the year? Obviously, we saw M&M's gone up because of the 2-year contracts. We've obviously seen that Mystify has been successful in the trial and the initial rollout. So you can see why they're sensible action points based on what has happened during the year. We can see that false alarms had gone up, so there's something to reduce those perhaps. We can see that R&D was just in line with the forecast. This is a key strategic priority, so we might need some further investment there. So your recommendations will of course vary depending on what happens in the actual scenario. So make sure your recommendations are focused on a specific scenario. And yes, it is really useful and helpful to have some ideas, but you need to tailor these to the specific scenario. All of this, this all needs to be tailored to the specific scenario. This is kind of guidance to remind you of the types of points you're going to think about including. But what you actually include depends on a specific scenario, just as you have seen me do here. All my points are tailored to the specific scenario. I'm trying to use the information the examiner has given me as much as possible. You can see how much of this information I've used in my answer. As soon as I've got a piece of information, I'm thinking, how can I use that? I've used all of this in there. Didn't do the response time, but that's probably backslash somewhere else. In fact, I think it was. But you can see I've used all of this as reasons why things have gone up or down, or further analysis of the numbers, impact on profit margins, and then I've used that to feed into my recommendations as well. So my answer is very focused on a specific scenario, very tailored to the specific scenario. But I like having my pro forma report with me just to remind me. I mean, I've practiced these exams so much now, I pretty much know it off by heart. But it's always good, particularly for you in the exam, to have this to hand, just in case you need a reminder or a prompt or a bit of a steer as to the type of points to consider including. So that's your requirement 1 complete. And then of course we need to do the executive summary. So as we've discussed previously, a summary is inherently similar to a conclusion. If we're going to conclude on how KUAS has performed during the year, then of course we're going to comment on the main numbers we've been asked to: revenue, each activity in total; profit, each activity in total; operating profit; and a request for advice. Now, what's actually happened is quite factual. Revenue's gone up for ICAEW, revenue's gone up for M&M, revenue's gone up overall. Gross profit, is up for all of them, but margin's up for ICAEW, but down for M&M. And the reasons are like factual, because of the maintenance contracts, because of the revenue mix shift. And similarly, with operating profit, it's gone up, head office costs are fixed. And then the facts about Ringstar, the points there are factual as well. This is what the impairment would be. This is the impact it would have on operating profit. So if you conclude on that, that is naturally going to be the same as what's in the main body of the report, because a lot of it's factual. The number went up by X because of this reason. So yes, the conclusion is shorter than the main body of the report. So you just take the number and the reason. You don't have all of your further analysis and your further insight points. But the points will be the same, because these are factual points, a number and a reason. This is what happened. So when you conclude on it, naturally, it's going to look very similar to the main body of the report, because you're reporting on the same facts. Now, of course, if you then summarize what's happened in the year, it's of course going to be the same as a conclusion, and it's going to be the same as the main body of the report, the facts, the numbers and the reasons why. And you can see that in the marking key, because you can see that to conclude on what's happened in the year, you need to comment on total revenue by activity, gross profit, operating profit, and the ringstar issue. But similarly, if you're going to summarize what's happened in the year, you are also going to need a comment on total revenue, revenue by activity, gross profit, operating profit, and something on the ringstar issue. So because the points we've got in our conclusions are factual points about what actually happened during the year, then of course we can copy those into our exec summary as a starting point for your exec summary. Then I suggest that you copy your conclusions over, so you've got the main facts in there. Overall revenue went up by this, higher than the growth in industry. ICAEW revenue went up by this because of the installs. M&M went up by this because of the change in the contracts. These are facts. So if you were to rewrite it for your exec summary, it would end up looking the same because the facts are the same. So in terms of using a bit of technology to save yourself some time, then you could kind of copy this over as a starting point. But you have to appreciate that the exec summary is more than just the conclusions. It's more than just reporting on the basic facts. And this is where the real skill comes in. Because what there will also be, and what you also need to do, is add in some additional points. Some points which are more than just the simple fact of number and reason. So not just simply, this is the number, up or down, and the reason. Because of course we know our analysis had more than that, or it certainly should have had more than that. Like for example, when we looked at ICAEW was up, and then the reason, but then we also had these further insight points, like how Mystify performs, and further analysis, and a trend point. Similarly with M&M, in the conclusions, we've just taken a bit which says number up, with the reason. But there's some further analysis we could do by looking at terminations. And we can see this with all of them. You can look at this with gross profit as well. In the conclusions, we've got number up with the reason, but we commented on the trend. So these further analysis, these trend points aren't in the conclusions. But what we need to do is add some of them, the most important ones, into the exec summary. So you might think, well, how do I know which ones to add in? Well, focus on the ones which are the most significant. So if you think about who the exec summary is for, it's obviously for the executives, the directors. So what are the areas where there's been like significant changes in significant numbers like profit margins, or if there's a particular revenue stream which is doing well or conversely doing poorly? If there has been a significant change in cash and you're required to look at cash, or if there's ethical issues and the additional piece of analysis as well, adding an extra point on that. So adding in some further analysis points on the big issues that happened in the year. I'm not going to come in and add on. I mean, what did I say was kind of a quite insignificant one? Maybe even that vehicle repair costs have gone down because of the new vans, because the vehicle repair costs were a small number. They've gone down. They probably expected them to go down, and that's probably part of the reason why they purchased the new vans. It's a small number overall. It doesn't have a significant impact on overall performance for the year, like on operating profit or revenue or on gross profit. So you want to focus on the areas which are the most significant. So we've already got, most of our numbers in there. So we've got like all of our numbers overall and then by each activity. But what we could do is we've said about monitoring and maintenance. We know they've introduced this new policy of working on non-KUAS installs and also doing 2-year contracts. And we could perhaps add in an additional point that we had about the decrease in the number of terminations. You could equally have added in that a point about Mystify, that's been successful. You could have added that in. We also saw that there was this change in tender strategy, and we've done some further analysis which has shown that their strategy seems to have worked, or they've achieved what they intended to achieve. So in the exec summary, we could add in some more points about tenders. So we're not adding in anything new. The executive summary shouldn't have anything which is in the main body of the report. So it's just that in the conclusions, we just had the number and the reason. We've copied the conclusions as a starting point for our exec summary, and now we're coming back and adding in the most significant further analysis trend points. It is a difficult skill, one of the hardest skills in the exam. Similarly with gross profit, we had gross profit and the reason. Then we've added in the point about the trend that wasn't in the conclusions because we wanted to keep our conclusions nice and concise. And we've added in this in the exec summary, and similarly with operating profit as well. And then with the receivable impairment, we said in our conclusions the impact on operating profit and the impact on cash, and that's all we had in the conclusions. But then we can think, well, what other points were in there that were quite significant? And then, of course, we said, well, actually, if you looked at trade receivables days, it looks as though other amounts might need impairment. And therefore, that is definitely something that needs to be brought to the attention of the directors. So we can see this was clearly a very important issue. And that's why I always say add in an additional point on whatever the additional analysis issue is. So you start with your conclusions as your starting point for your exec summary, and then you add in some additional points. And it requires judgment, based on what you think are the areas which are the most significant, but looking at particular significant changes in revenue streams, activity, looking at significant changes in profit margin, definitely add in an additional point on the additional analysis issue, and definitely on ethics as well. We, of course, had to look at cash kind of indirectly on the additional analysis issue there. So we've added in an additional point on that. And then your recommendations, copy which ones you think are the most important things to do. Again, the ones which will get marks in the marking key tend to be the ones which are kind of most important. So we said like expand, Mystify, but we also saw that there was a lack of, what appeared to be a lack of investment in R&D, or it's certainly lower than previous years. It was as forecast, but perhaps we might expect to see that go up. And you can see, so these were the conclusions. Then there was an additional point for looking at the tender strategy, whether that had been successful or not. We had added in a bit more on that in the exec summary, and then some specific recommendations here. So you might think, well, I'm trying to get these specific points. Why don't I just add in, a huge amount? Well, if you do that, you'll then lose this mark, the appropriate summary of report. And that's obviously a very easy mark to get. Just, don't copy over your whole requirement or copy over like huge chunks of it. You can copy over like the main points as a starting point, and that's acceptable to do that. But then you are showing the skill of selectively adding in some additional points. And therefore, by being selective, you're showing that skill of identifying the most important points. You're applying judgment as to what are the most important points. So by not letting it get too long, you're going to get that mark. So you can see that conclusions and not letting it get too long will get you there. I mean, that's from the conclusions as well. So it's really just a couple of extra points that we're trying to get by either having a specific recommendation or getting an additional point from our further analysis points. But it is difficult. I've yet to come across a student who says, I find this bit easy. I find it easy to decide on what the most important points are for the year to add into my exec summary. Everybody finds it hard. It is a hard skill. So, if you do struggle with it, that's perfectly normal. And actually, to get a good mark in the exec summary, you don't need to get these points. But what's important is you get this point, because that's quite easy. So don't do what some decide to do and just kind of copy over their whole requirement. That's definitely not in the spirit of what an exec summary is, or in the spirit of the exam. You definitely shouldn't do that. But to save yourself some time, what is acceptable is to copy your conclusions over as a starting point. So you've got the main numbers in there because they're going to be the same. The facts don't change. So you've got your main numbers in there with the reason, and then you need to show the skill of trying to identify some additional points. But, again, like I'm saying about easy, medium and hard marks across the whole paper, these are really hard marks to get. Probably the hardest marks really on the paper because it's very judgmental as to, what are the most important points that's happened in the year, what are the most important recommendations. But there's enough easy marks. You can see what I mean here about easy marks, and these are most certainly hard marks. So what's important is that you don't spend a huge amount of time trying to decide what are the most important points, because we're only talking about, 1 or 2 points here. So like 1 mark, basically, if each point is worth half a mark. So don't spend too long here. Make sure you move on time, and so that you can get all of the easy and medium marks in requirement 2. So I think overall a bit of a mixed bag for requirement 1. I think there's plenty of easy marks, particularly for the financial statement analysis. You've done it in BST, you've done it in CI, you've done it in SBA. You're probably quite comfortable with that, analysing your performance of a business. It's relatively predictable from the AI what's going to come up. Always make sure you focus on a specific requirement, though. You would have practiced a lot of mock exams, and you might have expectations of what you think is going to come up, and there's a risk that almost becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You just kind of go down that route, even though you haven't been asked for it. For example, if it didn't ask for operating profit, but you still had a section on operating profit, you'd get no marks, and you just waste a whole load of time. So make sure, even though the requirement's quite predictable, make sure that you focus on exactly what you've been asked to do, and whatever you have thought might be the reasons why a certain item might go up or down, or reasons that there might be in the AI for it going up or down. Make sure you use the exam paper information as much as possible in your answer, and you use what's happened in a year, the exam paper information, as your reasons why things have gone up or down, and not what you thought might have caused it to go up or down based on what's happened in previous years, i.e. in the AI. But provided you do that, then there's plenty of easy marks here, particularly kind of these 6 boxes here, and even the context box isn't too difficult to get. This is quite tricky. Conclusions is easy. Recommendations, again, there's a few easy ones and a few hard ones. So obviously get the easy ones. You always get one for your own recommendation as well. And then exec summary, again, real mixture there because they're easy to get. That's easy to get, but these are difficult to get. So make sure you get all of the easy and medium marks. Try to finish requirement 1 on time because then you've obviously got the time to get all the easy and medium marks in requirement 2 and 3. And you need a certain amount of time to get those points. Regardless how easy a point is, it takes time to read exam paper information and actually type your point. So, make sure you leave enough time for requirement 2 and requirement 3 because there's plenty of easy marks to get on those, as we shall see.